The little cries coming from the baby monitor were sharp, desperate shards of sound in the sterile quiet of their multi-million-dollar home. Isabella Rossi clutched her phone, her knuckles white as she listened to her husband's voice on the other end, a voice as smooth and unbothered as polished river stone. "It's a gala, Izzy. I can't just leave." She could hear the faint clink of glasses, the murmur of a crowd. "He's fine. It's just a baby being a baby. Give him some Tylenol." But his temperature was 104, and his breathing was shallow. Before she could plead again, he sighed a sound of pure annoyance. "Look, I have to go. We'll talk tomorrow." The line went dead, and in that chilling silence, Isabella knew two things with absolute certainty: her son was truly sick, and her marriage was already gone. What her husband Marcus Thorne didn't know was that the empire he was celebrating tonight would have a new queen by sunrise. The Thorne residence in the manicured hills of Northwood was a monument to modern success. A sprawling structure of glass steel and imported Italian marble, it was a house built to be admired, not lived in. It was cold, much like the marriage it housed. Tonight, the chill was bone deep. Isabella stood over the crib of their 10-month-old son, Leo. A damp cloth rested on his forehead, doing little to combat the heat radiating from his tiny body. His skin was mottled, his whimpers weak and raspy. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was more than a common cold, more than teething. This was the kind of sick that stole the air from a mother's lungs. She had called Marcus 3 times. The first time he answered with an irritated whisper. "I'm in the middle of a speech, Isabella. Can this wait?" "No, it can't. Leo's fever is 104. He's struggling to breathe." "Marcus, I'm scared." "Did you call Dr. Tussauds?" "Evans." He'd asked, his tone transactional, as if she were an incompetent employee. "His service said to go to the emergency room if his breathing is compromised." "I think it is. I need you to come home. I don't want to go alone." A heavy sigh. "You're overreacting. You always do. Give him the medicine. I'll check in later." He hung up. The second call went straight to voicemail. The third call was the one that shattered everything. He picked up his voice slick with champagne and impatience. That's when he delivered the line that would echo in her mind for years to come. "It's just a baby being a baby." And then he was gone, choosing the glitter of the Thorne Development's annual benefactors gala over his sick child. She knew with a certainty that settled like ice in her veins that he wasn't just at a gala. He was with her. Sienna Vance, a junior marketing associate at his company, all of 24 years old, with ambition that shone brighter than her highlights. Isabella had seen the signs for months. The late-night board meetings, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his suit's the second phone he thought she didn't know about. She had tried to address it to salvage the life they had built. Each attempt was met with gaslighting and accusations of being a bored, hysterical housewife. He called her life of managing their estate, raising their son, and hosting his endless parade of business partners a vacation. He'd forgotten that she wasn't just a pretty face he'd married. He'd forgotten the woman she used to be before she became Mrs. Thorne. Isabella Rossi, the architect, the woman who had graduated top of her class from Columbia, the woman who had co-designed the very building where his company was first headquartered. She had given up her own promising firm to support his believing his promises of a partnership, a shared life, a shared empire. Tonight, he had made it clear what that promise was worth. Looking at Leo so fragile and small, a different kind of fire ignited within her. It wasn't the hot, messy flame of jealousy. It was a cold, controlled burn of pure, unadulterated rage. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had dismissed their son. He had left her alone in a moment of sheer terror. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Crying was a luxury she could no longer afford. With a steady hand, she packed a diaper bag, her movements precise and efficient. She bundled a feverish Leo into his car seat, his weak cries tearing at her heart. As she walked through the cavernous, silent foyer, she glanced at the large framed portrait on the wall, a photo from their wedding day. Marcus was smiling, a look of triumph on his face. She had thought it was love. Now she saw it for what it was, acquisition. She didn't look back. As the automatic gates of their estate slid shut behind her, she wasn't just driving to the hospital. She was driving away from the life she knew and toward a future she would have to seize for herself. The first call she would make from the hospital waiting room wouldn't be to her mother or her friends. It would be to a man Marcus Thorne had wronged almost as much as he had wronged her. And he would be the key to everything. The emergency room at Northwood General was a symphony of controlled chaos. Beeping machines hushed conversations, the sharp smell of antiseptic. Isabella sat in a stiff plastic chair, Leo sleeping fitfully in her arms, an IV line taped delicately to his tiny hand. The doctor had been kind but firm. It was a severe case of RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, not life-threatening if treated properly, but incredibly dangerous for an infant. "You were right to bring him in," the doctor had said. His oxygen levels were dropping. Another few hours at home could have been a very different story. Each word was a steel plate being riveted onto her resolve, a very different story. Marcus's casual dismissal. It's just a baby, played on a loop in her head. No longer just an insult, but a potential death sentence. For hours she sat there watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her son's chest, the steady drip of the IV bag, his only lifeline. In the sterile silence of the private room, they'd moved him to the fog of panic began to clear, replaced by a crystalline, chilling clarity. The woman who had been weeping with fear in her mansion hours ago was gone. In her place was the architect. Isabella Rossi had always seen the world in terms of structure, stress points, and foundations. Before Marcus, her life had been blueprints and steel, concrete, and glass. She thrived on complexity, on finding elegant solutions to impossible problems. She had designed a cantilevered library that seemed to defy gravity, and a concert hall with acoustics so perfect you could hear a pin drop from the back row. Then came Marcus Thorne. He was a force of nature, a brilliant developer with a vision she found intoxicating. He saw her mind, not just her beauty. "You and me, Izzy," he'd said early on, spreading the blueprints for his first major skyscraper across her small apartment floor. "You design them, I'll build them. We'll build an empire." She fell in love with the dream as much as the man. She folded her small, acclaimed firm into his burgeoning company, Thorne Developments. Her designs won them the contracts that put them on the map. Her name was never on the letterhead, but her das was in every beam and window of their early success. She was the silent, uncredited architect of his empire. Then came the marriage, and then Leo. Marcus had encouraged her to step back. "You've done enough," he'd said. "Enjoy your life. Focus on being a mother." She had agreed, tired of fighting for credit, believing this was the next phase of their partnership. She had traded her drafting table for a designer kitchen, her hard hat for hosting duties. And slowly, she had become invisible. Now sitting in the dim hospital room, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers bypassed the numbers of her family and friends. She scrolled to a name she hadn't contacted in over a year. David Chen, Chief Financial Officer, Thorn Developments. She hit the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. Isabella, is everything okay? No, she said, her voice even devoid of the emotion that had been strangling her. But it's going to be. David, I need to see you. Tomorrow morning. It's about Marcus. There was a pause. David was a quiet, meticulous man, brilliant with numbers and utterly loyal. Or he had been. Isabella knew Marcus had recently passed him over for the COO position, giving it to a sycophantic crony from his MBA program. Marcus had promised David a significant equity stake years ago, a promise that had never materialized. David knew where the bodies were buried, because he was the one who had been forced to dig the graves. What is it about? David asked, his caution palpable. It's about the foundation, Isabella said, the old architectural language coming back to her naturally. I've discovered a critical flaw in the company's structure, a flaw Marcus seems to have forgotten about, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Another long silence. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He was connecting dots, remembering conversations, documents, and broken promises. The Parkside Tower financing, he said, finally his voice barely a whisper. A cold smile touched Isabella's lips for the first time that night. Exactly. My office. My old one, downtown. 8 a.m. Isabella, what are you planning? She looked at her sleeping son, his small face peaceful under the hospital lights. Her plan wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her and securing her son's future. I'm planning a hostile takeover, she said, and you're going to help me. The office was just as she'd left it 2 years ago, preserved under a layer of dust. Tightly rolled blueprints stood in a corner like ancient scrolls. Her architectural models, intricate and beautiful, were ghostly shapes under white dust cloths. She'd kept the lease on her small downtown studio, paying the rent out of a private account her father had left her. It was her one secret escape hatch, a place that was hers and hers alone. Marcus had called it her little hobby space and forgotten it existed. At precisely 8:00 a.m., David Chen knocked on the door. He looked tired, his suit immaculate, but his eyes wary. He was a man who lived by the numbers, who found safety in spreadsheets and balance sheets. What Isabella was proposing was the antithesis of order. Coffee, she offered, gesturing to a French press on the small kitchenette counter. Thank you, he said, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the evidence of a brilliant career, put on pause. I haven't been here since you designed the lobby for the Meridian building. A lot has changed since then, Isabella said, handing him a mug. Marcus is sleeping with Sienna Vance. He was with her last night while our son was on his way to the emergency room. David's expression didn't change, but a muscle tightened in his jaw. I'm sorry to hear that, Isabella. Truly. He wasn't surprised. He saw the expense reports for client dinners at 5-star hotels, the jewelry receipts coded as corporate gifts. I'm not looking for sympathy, David, she said, her tone all business. I'm looking for a partner. You know as well as I do that Thorn Developments is built on a foundation of my designs and your financial strategy. We were supposed to be the partners. Instead, we're the help. She let that hang in the air. David looked down into his coffee. She knew his story. He'd been with Marcus from the start, turning a shoestring budget into a $1 billion credit line. Marcus had dangled the promise of partnership for a decade. The COO promotion that went to someone else was the final stinging insult. What did you mean by a flaw in the structure? He asked, getting to the point. Isabella walked over to a locked, flat file cabinet. She spun the combination lock, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She laid it on her drafting table. "The Parkside Tower," she said. "The project that made the company what it is today. Do you remember the financing, the final $30 million gap that no bank would touch?" "Of course," David said. "Marcus secured it with a private lender at the last minute. He never disclosed the source. It's always been a black box in the financials." "It wasn't a private lender," Isabella said, opening the portfolio. "It was me." She slid a document across the table. It was a private loan agreement. The lender was a trust fund established by her grandfather, and she was the sole trustee. The collateral for the loan wasn't just shares in the company. It was a complex series of clauses she had insisted upon, at the time, drafted by her own father's notoriously shrewd estate lawyer. "I put up my inheritance to save his dream," she explained. "Marcus was desperate. He would have signed anything." David's eyes widened as he read. The clauses were ironclad. They stipulated that if the acting CEO Marcus was found to be engaging in gross financial malfeasance, dereliction of fiduciary duty, or moral turpitude that could damage the company's reputation, the trustee Isabella had the right to immediately call the loan due. If the loan couldn't be repaid within 24 hours, which it couldn't control of the company's majority shares, which were pledged as the ultimate security, would transfer directly to her. "Moral turpitude," David breathed, looking up at her. "His affair, his abandoning you and his sick child." "That's the leverage," Isabella said. "But it's not the mechanism. We can't go to the board with that. It's messy subjective. We need something concrete, undeniable. We need financial malfeasance." She looked at him pointedly. "And that David is where you come in. I know he has you moving money. Shell Corporation's personal expenses disguised as business costs. The apartment he keeps for Sienna, the cars, the trips, it's all in there, isn't it? You have the records." David stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city streets below. He was being asked to betray the man who had given him his career, a man he had once considered a friend. But that man was gone, replaced by an arrogant tyrant who demanded loyalty, but gave none in return. This wasn't just about helping Isabella. It was about justice for his own stolen decade. "He's been using the Evergreen Construction subsidiary as a personal slush fund," David said, his back still to her. "He funnels inflated invoices through it. I have copies of the real invoices and the doctored ones he submitted for the books. It's millions of dollars over the last 3 years alone. Enough to trigger a federal investigation." He turned back to face her, his eyes no longer wary but sharp with calculation. The cautious CFO was gone. In his place was a man who saw the numbers on the board and knew exactly how to play the game. "This is incredibly risky," he said. "If this fails, he'll destroy us both." "He's already destroyed what mattered," Isabella countered, her voice like steel. "I'm not afraid of him anymore. The question is, are you?" David looked from the damning documents on the table to the quiet, determined woman before him. He saw not a scorned wife, but a leader. He thought of the promotion he was denied, the partnership that never was, the daily humiliations. "He's at a development retreat in Aspen until tomorrow afternoon," David said. "Sienna is with him. His flight lands at 5 p.m. We'd have to move fast." It was all the confirmation she needed. An alliance was forged in that dusty office built on shared betrayal and a mutual desire to see an empire fall into the right hands. "Then let's get to work," Isabella said. "We have less than 36 hours to dismantle a king." Their next stop was not a gleaming corporate law firm. It was a discreet old money establishment in a brownstone on the Upper East Side. The name on the brass plaque read Gable and Croft. There was no website, no advertising. One went to Harriet Gable when a problem needed to be solved with the brutal, silent efficiency of a surgical strike. Harriet, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a severe chignon and eyes that missed nothing, listened to their story without interruption. She was Isabella's father's lawyer, the same woman who had drafted the loan agreement a decade ago. She remembered the meeting well. "Your father was a wise man, Isabella," Harriet said, after David had finished his detailed explanation of Marcus's financial gymnastics. "He told me, Marcus Thorne is a brilliant builder, but a reckless man. Build my daughter a fortress within that contract." Her lips curved into a faint, predatory smile. "So I did." She spread the original contract on her vast mahogany desk. "This document is a work of art," she stated, her long fingers tracing the clauses. "The moral turpitude clause is our moral high ground. But David is right. It's a subjective fight for a boardroom. The financial malfeasance clause, however, is a canon." She looked at David. "Mr. Chen, the evidence you have, the dual invoices. The slush fund, is it irrefutable? It's watertight," David confirmed. "I have the server logs showing the original files and the doctored versions time-stamped. I have the wire transfers to the Shell Corporation's account, which I can prove Marcus controls personally." Harriet Gable leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Excellent. Then here is how we proceed. This is not a negotiation. It is an execution. We will trigger the clauses simultaneously. It will be a blitzkrieg." The plan she laid out was audacious. Step 1 was David. He would compile all the financial evidence into a secure, encrypted digital portfolio. This would be the cannonball. Step 2 was Harriet. She would draft 2 sets of documents. The first would be the formal calling of the loan, citing the financial malfeasance to be delivered to the company's board of directors. The second and more critical document would be an emergency filing with the state's corporate governance board and the bank that held the company's primary shares in escrow. This filing would execute the transfer of majority ownership to Isabella as per the security agreement in her loan contract. "The key," Harriet explained, her eyes gleaming, "is Article 11, Section B of the company's own bylaws, the very bylaws Marcus had drafted. It allows for an emergency transfer of executive power without a board vote in the event of catastrophic legal or financial liability that threatens the immediate solvency of the corporation. Your evidence, Mr. Chen, proves that Marcus is the catastrophic liability. We are not taking the company. We are saving it from its rogue CEO." She was using Marcus's own tools against him. It was brilliant. "When does this happen?" Isabella asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Timing is everything," Harriet said, looking at her calendar. "Marcus lands at 5 p.m. tomorrow. He'll go straight from the airport to his mistress's apartment. He won't check in with the office until the next morning, so we act tomorrow evening. At 7 p.m. sharp, Mr. Chen, you will electronically transmit the evidence portfolio to me and to a secure email address I will provide for each board member. At 7:01 p.m., my messenger will hand-deliver the notice to the acting chairman of the board's residence. At the same time, I will electronically file the share transfer with the state and the escrow agent. The digital timestamp is our proof." By the time the board members have finished reading the first page of David's evidence, Harriet continued, the share transfer will already be legally processed. They will be faced with a choice side with a CEO who has just been exposed as a crook and has already lost control of the company or ratify the new majority shareholder. It will be the easiest decision they ever make. There was a chilling perfection to it. No room for error. No time for Marcus to fight back. By the time he woke up on Wednesday morning, the war would already be over. As they left Harriet's office and stepped out into the crisp city air, Isabella felt a sense of vertigo. This was real. This was happening. "Are you ready for this?" David asked, his voice low. "Once we push this button, there's no turning back. You will be in charge of $1 billion company. You'll be his boss." Isabella thought of Leo in his hospital bed. She thought of Marcus's voice on the phone, dripping with contempt. "It's just a baby." She looked at David, her expression hardened into a mask of pure determination. "He built his empire in my shadow," she said. "It's time I stepped into the sun. Let's burn him down." Tuesday was a day of surreal calm before the storm. Isabella spent the day at the hospital, her world shrunk to the size of Leo's private room. He was responding well to treatment. His fever had broken, and the rasp in his breathing was subsiding. Holding his small, warm body against hers, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This was for him. Every risky, terrifying step she was taking was to build a secure world for this little boy, a world free from the whims of a man like Marcus. She coordinated with David and Harriet via encrypted texts, her thumb tapping out commands and confirmations on the screen of her phone. Architect, mother, and now general. Meanwhile, 1,800 miles away in Aspen, Marcus Thorne was living in a different reality. He was on the slopes with Sienna, the crisp mountain air a tonic for his ego. He'd just closed a preliminary deal for a new luxury resort, celebrating with $1,000 bottles of wine and fawning praise from his new lover. "You're a king, Marcus," Sienna had said, snuggling against him in front of a roaring fire at their chalet. "You build the world. And don't you forget it," he'd replied, feeling invincible. He'd briefly thought of Isabella's frantic call. Hysterical, he thought, with a dismissive sneer. She'd probably taken Leo to the ER for a sniffle and was now feeling foolish. He'd deal with her drama when he got back. He sent her a single perfunctory text. "Hope all is well. Landing tomorrow at 5. He didn't notice that she never replied. At 5:00 p.m. on Tuesday, Marcus's private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport. As Harriet predicted, he didn't go home. His driver took him straight to a sleek high-rise in Chelsea, to the apartment he leased for Sienna, the one paid for by the Evergreen Construction Slush Fund. At 6:55 p.m., Isabella was buckling a sleeping Leo into his car seat, discharged from the hospital and ready to go home. The timing felt like a sign from the universe. At the same time, in his home office, David Chen had his finger hovering over his mouse. On his screen was a single encrypted file labeled Project Nightingale. It contained every piece of damning evidence against Marcus. A distribution list was preloaded Harriet Gable and the personal email addresses of all 7 board members of Thorne Developments. In her office, Harriet Gable had 2 documents open on her screen. One was the emergency filing for the State Corporate Governance Board. The other was the official share transfer execution for the escrow agent. Both were ready to be sent with a single click. The city hummed around them, oblivious to the silent digital coup that was about to take place. At 7:00 p.m. on the dot, David clicked send. The cannonball had been fired. Instantly, phones began to chime in quiet, wealthy homes across the tri-state area as the board members received the email. The subject line crafted by Harriet was simple and impossible to ignore. Urgent evidence of fiduciary dereliction by CEO Marcus Thorne. At 7, 2:01 p.m. Harriet clicked her own mouse twice. The filings were sent, the digital timestamps were recorded. The fortress Isabella's father had her build had been stormed, and its power was now hers. In Chelsea, Marcus was pouring 2 glasses of champagne. He was celebrating his deal, his life, his genius. He raised his glass to Sienna. "To the future," he toasted, his voice booming with arrogance. "And to getting whatever you want." Across town, Isabella walked into the cold, silent marble foyer of her house. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a headquarters. She laid a sleeping Leo in his crib, his breathing now deep and even. She stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of her son's healthy sleep. Then she walked to the Home Office, his office. It was a shrine to his ego, filled with awards and photos of him shaking hands with important people. She sat down in his large leather chair. It felt comfortable. It felt right. The board members, initially shocked, were now frantically reading David's report. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of fraud and deceit. There were copies of bank statements, fake invoices, and even a copy of the lease for the Chelsea apartment paid for by the company. As they were reeling, a second email from Harriet Gable arrived. Subject: notification of change in majority ownership of Thorn Developments. It was checkmate. There was nothing to debate. Siding with Marcus now would be corporate suicide. Within minutes, the first reply came from the chairman of the board, a stoic old guard businessman named Arthur Paddington. His message was brief and to the point. Acknowledged. The board will ratify the transfer and support you, Ms. Rossi, awaiting your instructions. Isabella read the email on Marcus's desktop computer. A slow, steady smile spread across her face. It wasn't a smile of glee or joy. It was the quiet, satisfied smile of an architect watching her most complex, most personal, most important design rise perfectly into place. The king was toasting his reign in a fool's paradise. He had no idea his kingdom had already fallen. Marcus Thorn woke to the unfamiliar sensation of cheap morning light. Not the carefully filtered automated glow of his Northwood mansion, but the raw, unfiltered glare of a New York City sunrise slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sienna's apartment. He had a dull headache, pounding in rhythm with the distant sound of a car horn, and his mouth tasted of stale champagne and regret not for his infidelity, but for indulging in a third bottle of Krug. "Morning, sleepyhead," Sienna murmured, stretching beside him. "Did the king have sweet dreams of his kingdom?" "Something like that," he grunted, swinging his legs out of bed. Power was his aphrodisiac, and last night's Aspen deal had left him feeling like a god. He reached for his phone, ready to begin his daily ritual of firing off commands and asserting his dominance over the empire he commanded. He tapped the icon for his corporate email. A small, sterile box popped up. "Access denied. Please contact your system administrator." He frowned, a flicker of annoyance. Damn IT department probably pushed a faulty security update. He tried again. Same result. He switched to the company's internal messaging platform, intending to blast the head of technology. His profile, usually a confident headshot, was gone. In its place was a generic grey silhouette. All his channels and groups were inaccessible. "What is it, honey?" Sienna asked, propping herself up on an elbow. "Nothing. Idiots can't keep the servers running." He snapped, his irritation growing. He decided to bypass the small stuff and check on the wire transfer for the Aspen deal. He opened his corporate banking app. Invalid credentials. Now, the flicker of annoyance ignited into a spark of genuine alarm. This wasn't a simple glitch. This was a system-wide lockout. He redialed his COO, Frank, the crony he'd promoted over David. This time, Frank picked up his voice, a high-pitched squeak of pure panic. "Marcus, oh my God, Marcus, where are you? What the hell is going on, Frank? Why am I locked out of everything?" Marcus barked. "They're gone, Marcus, the accounts, the board. They had an emergency meeting last night. They're saying you're out. Harriet Gable's people are here, changing locks, taking servers offline. It's Isabella, Marcus." Somehow, it's Isabella. The name hit him like a physical shock. Isabella. His quiet, docile housewife, Isabella. The idea was so ludicrous, so utterly nonsensical that he actually laughed. "Frank, you're hysterical. She wouldn't know how to run a bath, let alone a coup. It's a hack, a sophisticated one. Now get a grip, I'm on my way." He hung up his heart, hammering a frantic, discordant rhythm against his ribs. He threw on his clothes from the night before, ignoring Sienna's questions. "I have to go," he said, his mind a whirlwind of denial and rage. The thought of Isabella orchestrating this was absurd. It had to be a competitor. Someone trying to cripple him. He'd crush them. The Uber ride to Midtown was a blur of frantic energy. He was a caged tiger, pacing the confines of the back seat. He envisioned himself storming the lobby, a wrathful god, descending to restore order, firing Frank for his incompetence, suing the hackers into oblivion, and reasserting his absolute control. He burst out of the cab and strode toward the gleaming black tower of Thorn Developments, his monument to himself. He shoved his keycard at the security turnstile. A harsh buzz sounded, and a red light flashed. "Access denied." He tried again. Buzz. "Access denied." "What is this?" he roared at the lobby's head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Paul he'd seen 1,000 times. "Paul, open this gate right now." Paul looked deeply uncomfortable, refusing to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. My instructions are, your access has been revoked. I can't let you pass." "Your instructions? I give the instructions here." He bellowed, his voice echoing in the vast marble lobby. A few employees lingered near the elevators, watching, whispering. The public humiliation was a splash of cold water, but it only fueled his rage. "You are finished, Paul. Do you hear me? I'll have your job. That will be all, Paul. You're handling the situation correctly." The voice was calm-cold and utterly authoritative. Marcus spun around. Standing there was Harriet Gable, flanked by 2 impassive security consultants in dark suits. She held a thick navy-blue file folder. "Ms. Gable," he sneered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Has my hysterical wife hired you to serve me divorce papers?" "She has," Harriet said without a flicker of emotion. "But that is the least of your concerns." She held out the folder. "This is for you. I suggest you read it before you embarrass yourself further." He snatched it from her hand and retreated to a leather bench in the lobby, the curious stares of his former employees burning into his back. He ripped it open. The first page was a formal notice from the board of directors. "Effective immediately. Marcus Thorne has been removed as CEO and chairman, a result of the execution of clauses pertaining to financial malfeasance and dereliction of duty as stipulated in the Parkside Tower financing agreement. Majority ownership and all executive authority has been legally transferred to Isabella Rossi." He read her name 3 times, but his brain refused to process it. He frantically flipped through the pages, his world shrinking to the words on the paper. There was a copy of the loan agreement he'd signed a decade ago, a dim, dusty memory, from a time of desperation. He saw his own arrogant signature at the bottom. He saw the appendix, a detailed, damning summary of David Chen's financial report. David, the quiet, loyal number cruncher. The betrayal was so profound, it left him breathless. Finally, he saw the minutes from the board meeting with the signature of every single member men he had considered his allies, his pawns formally ratifying Isabella's takeover. He was drowning. He fumbled for his phone, dialing the board chairman, Arthur Paddington. Voicemail. He tried another member. Voicemail. One by one, he tried them all. Each unanswered call was another door slamming shut, another nail in his coffin. He was an exile, a pariah. The frantic energy drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, terrifying cold. He hailed another cab, his voice a hoarse whisper. Northwood. The journey home was a descent into a personal hell. The city he had once seen as his personal playground now felt alien and mocking. He saw flashes of Isabella's face over the years, her sharp questions about contracts he'd told her not to worry about, the keen intelligence in her eyes he had chosen to ignore, her quiet competence he had mistaken for weakness. This wasn't a sudden emotional act. This was a strategy, a long-planned, meticulously executed demolition. When he finally burst through the front door of his home, he found it silent. He stormed through the marble halls, shouting her name. Isabella! Isabella! He found her in his office. Her office. She was sitting behind his desk, dressed in a sharp, dark blue power dress. The air in the room was different. The clutter of his ego, the pointless awards, the self-congratulatory photos had been cleared away. The room felt cleaner, more focused, more powerful. On the desk in front of her were two things, a steaming cup of tea and a set of divorce papers. She didn't look up when he entered. She simply took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, the clink of the porcelain against the saucer, the only sound in the room. What have you done? He breathed, his voice a ragged mess of disbelief and fury. She finally raised her eyes to meet his. Her gaze was not hateful or tearful or vengeful. It was something far worse. It was indifferent. It was the look of a CEO assessing a failed asset. I secured my son's future, she said, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. Something you were unwilling to do. This is my company, my life, he roared, slamming his fists on the desk, a pathetic echo of his earlier rage. You tricked me. This is illegal. On the contrary, she said, gesturing to a thick document to her left. It is perfectly legal. Your signature is on every page. And as for your life, you made your choices, Marcus. You chose the gala. You chose the mistress. You chose to tell me my fears for our son's health didn't matter. You said he was just a baby. Well, this, she swept her hand around the office, is just a company. She pushed the divorce papers towards him. Sign these. They are exceptionally generous. You'll be left with more than enough to start over. You will have supervised visitation with Leo contingent on your behavior. If you sign this, all stays quiet. If you fight me, she tapped the folder containing David's evidence. This goes to the U.S. Attorney's office, and I assure you they will be far less generous than I am. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time in years. The quiet, accommodating wife was gone. In her place was a queen, a titan, a woman made of iron and ice. The architect he had once admired and then foolishly tried to cage had just demolished his world and built her own on the rubble. And he finally truly understood. He had not been overthrown by an enemy. He had been overthrown by a consequence he himself had created. The confrontation in the office was not the swift execution Isabella had anticipated. It was the slow, agonizing dismantling of a man. Faced with the undeniable checkmate of the divorce papers and the threat of federal prosecution, Marcus's rage fractured, revealing the terrified hollow man beneath. He began to cycle through the only tactics he had left: manipulation and bluster. "You can't do this, Izzy," he started, his voice attempting a tone of reason that sounded utterly foreign. "You'll run the company into the ground. You're an architect, not a CEO. These deals, the investors, you don't understand that world." Isabella simply leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. "I understand the foundation of this company better than anyone, Marcus. I understand that your Lakeside Elysian project is over-leveraged by 30%, and the environmental impact reports you buried are a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. I understand that the Singaporean Sovereign Fund is looking for sustainable investments, not reckless vanity projects. I understand it all perfectly." His jaw went slack. She knew. She hadn't just been a wife. She had been watching, listening, and learning. He switched tactics, trying to bargain. Okay, you've made your point. You're angry. I get it. I messed up. So let's make a deal. Don't cut me out completely. Let me stay on as a consultant, a silent partner. No one has to know, for the good of the company. The company needs a clean break from the toxicity and fraud you embedded in its culture," she replied, her voice cutting through his pleas. "Your presence would be a liability. The deal is on the table, Marcus. It's the only one you're going to get." He finally resorted to his last, most despicable weapon: their son. Think of Leo. What will this do to him? His parents at war, his father publicly ruined. You would do that to your own child out of spite? The last vestiges of warmth in Isabella's eyes turned to permafrost. She stood up, leaning her knuckles on the desk, her face a mask of cold fury. "I am doing this for my child. You seem to have forgotten that you declared war when you left that same child struggling to breathe so you could drink champagne with your mistress. You ruined yourself, Marcus. I am just signing the paperwork." She slid the pen across the polished desk. It came to a stop directly in front of him. The finality of the gesture broke him. He stared at the pen, a simple instrument that now held the weight of his entire world. With a trembling hand, he picked it up. This pen had signed billion-dollar deals, scrawled arrogant notes in the margins of blueprints, and endorsed checks for lavish gifts for his lover. Now its only purpose was to sign his own surrender. His signature, usually a bold, confident, / was a shaky, almost illegible crawl across the signature line. He was signing away his marriage, his company, his name, his very identity. He dropped the pen as if it had burned him. He looked up. His eyes hollowed out, searching her face for any flicker of the woman he had married. He found none. "Are you happy now?" He whispered the question, pathetic. "Happiness is not the goal," Isabella replied, her voice steady as stone as she collected the signed papers. "Security is. Freedom is. My son and I are now secure, and I am finally free. You should go, Marcus. A new security team will be here in an hour to change the locks." He stumbled out of the office, a man erased. As the heavy front door clicked shut behind him, Isabella stood alone in the silence. There was no surge of triumphant laughter. There was only the slow, deep exhale of a breath she felt like she had been holding for 10 years. The immense weight of her new reality settled onto her shoulders, but it did not feel like a burden. It felt like a mantle of power. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Then she picked up the phone and made her first official call as CEO. "David," she said, her voice clear and firm. "It's done. I'll see you at 7 a.m. We have work to do." The following days were a masterclass in controlled transition. Isabella's first all-hands meeting was held in the company's main auditorium. As she walked onto the stage, a wave of whispers and murmurs rippled through the anxious crowd. They saw the woman from the society pages, the CEO's beautiful wife. They were expecting a tearful, vengeful speech or an incompetent figurehead. They were wrong. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal grey dress, she radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. "Good morning," she began. "My name is Isabella Rossi. Before I was a wife or a mother, I was an architect. My designs for the Parkside Tower and the Meridian building are the cornerstones of this company's initial success. I am not here to replace Marcus Thorne. I am here to reclaim the original vision of this company, one of innovation, quality, and integrity." She was direct and decisive. She announced that the over-leveraged Lakeside Elysian project was suspended indefinitely and that resources would be redirected to a green building initiative that Marcus had laughed out of the boardroom a year prior. She announced David Chen's promotion to COO to a smattering of genuine applause from those who knew his value. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge that stunned the skeptics. She wasn't just a new boss. She was a leader. In the weeks that followed, a new culture bloomed in the halls of the company, which was quickly rebranded from Thorne Developments to Rossi Build. The fear-based sycophancy that Marcus had fostered was replaced by collaboration and respect. Late one evening, as Isabella and David were poring over new blueprints in her office, he looked up and smiled. "You know," he said, "people are talking in the hallways again. They're sharing ideas. They're not afraid to fail. You didn't just take over a company, Isabella. You liberated it." Meanwhile, Marcus's world had shrunk to the size of a bar stool. He sat in a dimly lit, overpriced hotel bar, nursing a whiskey, a ghost haunting his own past. On the large screen above the bar, a financial news anchor was praising Rossi Build's meteoric stock surge. "CEO Isabella Rossi is being hailed as a visionary," the anchor said, breathing new life and a sense of ethical purpose into the construction industry. At a nearby table, two young bankers clinked their glasses. To Rossi, one of them said, "Legend." Marcus downed his drink, the sound of his own irrelevance, a bitter pill. 6 months after the takeover, Isabella's office bore no resemblance to the one Marcus had occupied. The heavy, dark furniture was gone, replaced with light wood, glass, and steel. Architectural models of her new, daring project lined the walls, and on the floor, Leo played happily with a set of oversized building blocks. She picked him up, his healthy laughter filling the room. He was walking now, a sturdy, confident toddler. He was the living embodiment of her victory. She carried him to the vast window overlooking the city skyline, a glittering tapestry of human achievement. The setting sun caught the edges of the glass, and steel making it all seem to glow from within. She held her son close, letting him rest his head on her shoulder. He was safe. He was secure, and their future was as bright and limitless as the view before them. "Look, Leo," she whispered. Her voice filled not with arrogance, but with a quiet, profound sense of purpose and creation. "We build the world." And so a dismissive phrase, "It's just a baby," became the catalyst that brought down an empire and built a new one. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation. It's about the silent strength that so many people, especially women, are forced to cultivate in the shadows of someone else's ego. Isabella's story reminds us that the foundations we help build for others can sometimes have secret blueprints for our own liberation. She didn't just take his company. She took back her name, her career, and her power. What would you have done in her position? Do you believe she went too far? Or was it the perfect response to years of being diminished and a final unforgivable betrayal? We all have a breaking point, and sometimes reaching it is the only way to find our true strength. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true life dramas where the underestimated rise up and reclaim their throne. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.